To the man who's not my dad, but always pays like one. That's what she said, loudly, in front of 10 people. Crystal champagne flute held high, lip-glossed smirk curling like she'd been waiting for that line all night. Madison, 18 years old, draped in a designer dress I paid for, sitting at a table I reserved in a private room of one of the most pretentious restaurants in the city, dropped that little grenade with all the grace of a Mean Girls sequel villain. Her friends burst into laughter. That tight, smug, collegiate laugh they perfected in prep school, also paid for by me. One of them actually leaned over to fist bump her. I didn't catch his name. He wore a blazer without a tie, which already told me everything I needed to know about him. But what stopped my heart wasn't the toast. It was Elaine, my wife of 19 years, who chuckled along like it was all some harmless sitcom moment. She even clinked her glass against Madison's and said, "Well, you always were the generous type, Richard." I don't remember standing up. I remember the coffee was lukewarm. I remember the waiter had just set down the chocolate souffle she had been raving about all week. I remember the slice of lemon on my water glass slipping and falling onto the white linen as I moved my arm. No one told me to stay. No one followed. No, honey, she didn't mean it. No, wait, it was a joke. Just the echo of laughter behind me as I walked past the maitre d', who gave me the sympathetic glance of someone who's seen too many birthday dinners that end in emotional train wrecks. I drove home in silence. At first, I just sat in my study, staring at the wall. There's this old clock in there. It doesn't even keep time properly anymore, but the tick, tick, tick was deafening that night. You see, people like Madison think there's no cost to cruelty when it's dressed up in sarcasm. They don't realize how fast the room can shift when the man holding the checkbook decides he's done being the punchline. I opened the trust portal on my laptop. The account was still active, fully funded. Scheduled disbursements to the university, to the housing service in New Haven, to the stipend card she used for education-related living expenses, all set to go live in 5 business days. But 3 years ago, I'd added something to the trust. Quietly, without fanfare, without warning. Clause 12. It sat there like a coiled snake beneath a pile of cash. A clause I insisted on during a bitter night when I'd overheard Elaine telling Madison, "Don't worry, he's just happy to have a family. You can do what you want." I drafted the language with my attorney. Every word sharpened like a scalpel. No melodrama. No threats. Just law. In the event the primary beneficiary engages in verifiable verbal abuse, mockery, or defamatory behavior directed at the grantor, and such behavior is documented through audio or video evidence, the trust shall immediately terminate all current and future disbursements. Retroactive reclamation of unused funds will be initiated. No appeals. No exceptions. I had recorded the dinner. I didn't mean to. I had been using a voice memo app earlier that day to dictate notes on a new estate planning brief I was reviewing. I forgot it was still running in my pocket. But there it was, clear as daylight. The voice of the girl I paid to raise, toasting to my usefulness like I was a corporate sponsorship deal, not a stepfather. I clicked the upload button. Attached the file. The system asked, "Are you sure you wish to proceed with triggering clause 12? This action is irreversible." I hovered for a second. Not because I doubted myself. Because I knew once I clicked, I wasn't just ending the payments. I was ending the illusion that love could be bought. That years of sacrifice could make up for the absence of biological ties. That being the man who stayed somehow earned me a place at the table beyond just paying the bill. I clicked yes. The confirmation alert blinked. Clause 12 triggered. Legal notification underway. Then I closed the laptop, shut the lights off in the study, and I slept like a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. Elaine stirred her coffee with the back of a spoon, the metallic clink ringing through the kitchen like a child banging on a toy piano. She didn't notice. She was too amused with herself. "He'll be back," she muttered, tossing her silk robe tie over her shoulder like it was a joke she'd told too many times. "He always pouts when he doesn't get the last word." Madison laughed from the patio, legs propped up, sunglasses on, flipping through her phone like nothing had happened. "He even left before dessert," she said, scrolling past a photo someone had taken at the dinner. It was a group shot, her leaning into her friend Jeremy, her mom mid-laugh, and Richard in the corner, stiff, blurry, already halfway out of the frame. She zoomed in and snorted. "Look at him," like he knew he didn't belong. Elaine didn't bother looking. "He'll calm down," she said, voice dipped in that careless honeyed tone she always used when she thought she'd won. "By dinner he'll be back to asking if you need anything from your packing list." But Richard wasn't checking packing lists. He wasn't checking anything. He was sitting in his office with the blinds drawn, a fresh cup of black coffee beside him, watching the back end of a trust fund unwind itself like a noose in reverse. Two systems had been set in motion that morning, both automated, both surgical. At precisely 9:02 a.m., Yale's Office of Financial Aid received a red flag alert. Primary funding for beneficiary Madison Elaine Carter, Trust ID, RCS 1271, has been rescinded per emergency clause invocation. All pending disbursements are frozen pending legal review. The alert triggered a cascade. The housing coordinator who had already confirmed Madison's early move-in date now received a cancellation. The campus health office that had flagged her premium insurance upgrade was informed the policy sponsor had withdrawn. Her international program liaison received a voided travel stipend record. The funding didn't just disappear. It was unacknowledged, like it had never existed. At 10:43 a.m., the legal firm of Binder and Locke received a system ping. Clause 12 activated. Upload confirmed. Proceed with documentation cascade. By noon, Richard's attorney had the trust binder open on his desk, quietly prepping the notarized withdrawal forms. It would take a day for the university to fully digest what was happening. But the silence on Elaine's end? That would crack first. At 2:51 p.m., Richard's phone buzzed. Caller ID, Dean Avery Halbridge. He answered without a pause. Richard speaking. A voice, tight and clipped, came through. Mr. Carlson, I'm calling from the dean's office regarding a rather unprecedented development in your daughter's financial profile. Our system indicates your educational trust has been withdrawn under something called Clause 12. Is this accurate? Yes, Richard said calmly. I authorized it. The dean paused. Would you care to elaborate? No. Sir, the consequences. I'm aware. The line went silent. Then a short, professional, understood, and the call ended. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply sipped his coffee, opened his ledger, and continued annotating estate filings. But across town, the illusion was still intact. Elaine had just stepped out of the shower. She was humming. Madison had just sent a Snapchat of herself trying on outfits for orientation week, captioned, "Stepdad who?" Then the house phone rang. Landline. No one called that line except HOA notices or wrong numbers. Elaine glanced at it once, let it ring. It rang again. Same number. This time she answered. Hello. There was a rustle, then a voice, female, but strained, frantic, angry. Is this Mrs. Carter? Yes. Who's this? This is Dean Avery's assistant from Yale's financial office. Do you even understand what you just made him do? Elaine blinked. Excuse me. Do you understand what invoking a full financial collapse does to a student's enrollment? We're now reprocessing housing, travel, course schedules, and insurance for a student who no longer meets the minimum funding threshold. Elaine held the phone away from her ear like it had burned her. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the withdrawal of the trust. The emergency clause. The total annihilation of Madison's file. We don't even have clearance to hold her seat anymore. Elaine, now pale, walked toward the patio, put the call on speaker. Madison looked up from her phone just in time to hear the woman on the other end yell. Do you even understand what you just made him do? Madison blinked. Wait, what? Elaine turned off the speaker. But the voice had already broken through. The tone, the panic, the consequence, it didn't match their morning. It didn't belong in their brunch-scented little world. And it shattered the fantasy they'd been lounging in since the night before. Madison looked at her mother, confusion turning to fear. What's going on? Elaine didn't answer. She was already walking to the study, the one place she hadn't entered in weeks, where the papers lived, where the signature she once scribbled without reading was waiting. 2 years ago, almost to the week, Richard had stood just outside the hallway to the den, unseen, unnoticed, and utterly, entirely awake. It was just after midnight. Madison was home from her sophomore year at prep school for spring break. Elaine had made hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps, her little bonding ritual when Madison visited. Richard hadn't joined them that night. He'd been working late, technically reviewing insurance filings, but really just trying to avoid another night of being invisible in his own home. The house was quiet, the way expensive houses often are. Sound doesn't carry through thick walls and triple-pane windows. But that night, voices drifted. Careless ones. Confident ones. The kind of words people say when they're sure the subject of their mockery can't hear them. Don't worry, Elaine said, her voice low and casual. He's grateful just to have us. Us. Like they were a package deal he'd lucked into. Madison laughed. He literally paid to upgrade his life from loneliness to luxury. I'm not even mad about it. It's kinda sad. Elaine didn't correct her, didn't flinch. Instead, she added with a chuckle, it's not like he's your real dad. But hey, if the wallet fits. Richard stood there for a moment, one hand on the doorframe, the other gripping the back of his neck, pressing into the muscles that suddenly felt like concrete. He didn't confront them. He didn't make a scene. He went back to his office and sat down in the leather chair he had bought during their first year of marriage. It squeaked faintly when he leaned back, a reminder of time and where and years that had, apparently, meant nothing. That's when the idea first formed. Not anger, not vengeance, not even sadness, just clarity. They were comfortable because he made it so. They were cruel because they assumed that comfort was permanent. That money, once offered, became entitlement. That love, once given, could be kicked around without consequence. He didn't want to yell. He didn't want to punish. He wanted leverage. So, at 1:17 a.m., he sent an email to Samuel Binder, his trust and estate attorney. Subject line, contingency clause inquiry. The next morning, Sam called. You're finally ready, huh? Sam asked, not even surprised. He'd known Richard a long time. Long enough to know the man didn't make impulsive decisions. I want a clause, Richard said flatly. If they ever cross the line, really cross it, I want to be able to pull the plug. Quietly. Legally. No drama. They spent weeks drafting it. Not a nuclear option, just a wire tucked into the foundation. A fuse no one would know existed until it was lit. Clause 12. The wording was precise. Narrow enough to avoid unintended activation. Broad enough to cover what mattered. In the event that the named primary beneficiary engages in conduct defined as verbal abuse, mockery, or defamation against the grantor, and said conduct is verified via documented audio or visual evidence, the educational trust shall be subject to full revocation. All funds, disbursed or pending, may be rescinded permanently and retroactively. No appeals. No conditional reinstatement. No obligation of prior notice to the beneficiary. Sam had one question before finalizing it. You sure you want to do this, Rich? It's going to be a quiet hammer. If you ever swing it, it'll break everything. Richard had paused, then said the line that Sam would later quote in the notarization notes. If a man builds a home, he should at least be allowed to defend it when the termites start laughing. Clause 12 was embedded into the trust within the month. Now came the trickier part, getting Elaine to sign. The trust required spousal acknowledgement to preserve tax shelter benefits. Elaine had signed the original version years ago, back when Madison was still in braces and Richard still believed that a private school could fix the coldness in her voice. So Sam updated the packet, masked Clause 12 among other standard revisions, adjustments to fund payout timing, language to comply with new IRS regulations, and a minor change to the investment vehicle allocations. Elaine had never been one for paperwork. 6 months later, over breakfast, he slid her the new trust packet. What's this? She asked between bites of toast. Minor updates to the educational trust. IRS stuff. Just needs your signature and initials. She flipped through the pages absently, skimming without reading, like someone pretending to know the menu at a restaurant they've been to too many times. Do I need a lawyer to read this? He smiled. Only if you plan to sue me. She laughed. Cute. Page 12. Initialed. Page 16. Signed. Clause 12, buried on page 9, between contingent disbursement periods and emergency succession procedures. Signed. Stamped. Witnessed. She never asked what it meant. Why would she? In her mind, the money was unconditional. The love was permanent. The man at the center of it all. He was just grateful to be there. Until the moment he wasn't. At 9:14 a.m., the dean of admissions at Yale University slammed a printed email onto his desk so hard his assistant flinched outside the glass door. The subject line on the paper read, Immediate Trust Revocation, Carter, Madison E. The language was formal, the tone neutral. But the consequences? Nuclear. He buzzed the intercom. Give me the financial aid office. Now. And someone find out if this Clause 12 nonsense is even enforceable. The assistant nodded, but before she could respond, he barked. And cancel the press interview this afternoon. I am not parading our diversity and merit scholars to the media while one of them is currently financially disintegrating in my inbox. Across campus, 3 different offices began backtracking Madison Carter's enrollment paperwork. Not shredding, not deleting, just unwinding. Quietly, carefully, legally. It wasn't a dramatic purge. It was death by 1,000 legal edits. The merit-based housing waiver? Gone, because it was layered with the now-defunct trust support. The International Student Welcome Package? On hold. The conditional mentorship pairing? Reassigned. At 11:06 a.m., an internal email thread confirmed the final blow. Without a verified funding source, Madison Carter's admission contract is null until reassessment. The university is not legally obligated to hold her seat. Back at the house, Elaine was still wearing the same robe she'd laughed in the day before. Only now, it looked wilted. Her hair was unbrushed. A mug of untouched tea sat cold beside her. Madison was pacing. They're saying I don't have housing anymore. I called the program head, and she said my name's not even on the confirmed student list anymore. What the hell is going on? Elaine had called Richard 3 times. No answer. On the 4th attempt, it didn't even ring. Straight to voicemail. Then, at 12:23 p.m., her email pinged. From Richard Carlson. Subject, Clause 12, Enforcement Notice. Body, Elaine. Clause 12 has been enforced. Please consult the document you co-signed on March 17th, 2 years ago. No further discussion required. Richard. Elaine stared at the screen. The words didn't move, but her eyes kept scanning like they might change on the 10th pass. Clause 12, she whispered. Madison froze. What's Clause 12? Elaine didn't answer. She stood, snatched her car keys, and left without another word. Greger and Fields sat in a sandstone office building in Midtown. Elaine stormed into the lobby like she was marching into court. The receptionist looked up from her desk just in time to see the fury land. I need to speak to someone about the Carlson Educational Trust. The receptionist clicked her headset. Miss Carter, please have a seat. Mr. Fields is available in a moment. But Elaine didn't sit. 10 minutes later, Grant Fields, senior partner, estate law demigod, and the man who had overseen their trust filings for the past 2 decades, opened the glass door with that same measured, too polite voice that made rich people think he was on their side. Elaine, he nodded. Let's talk in my office. Once inside, Elaine barely let him close the door. What the hell is Clause 12? Richard's ignoring me, and Yale is unraveling my daughter's life over it. Fields didn't respond right away. He pulled a thick binder off the shelf. Labeled, Carlson/Carter Educational Trust, Rev 3. He opened it to a page with multiple neon tabs. Page 9. Clause 12. He slid it across the desk. Elaine read the title, Emergency Rescission Protocol, Beneficiary Misconduct. She scanned the rest. Her own initials in the margin. Her signature at the bottom. The date stamped. The notary seal embossed and visible like a punch to the face. You signed it, Fields said evenly. We notarized it. Richard followed every rule. The system flagged the violation, confirmed documentation, and executed the clause. Everything is above board. Elaine looked up, jaw clenching. This can't be happening. Fields didn't blink. Elaine, it already has. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, white-knuckled. Richard didn't tell me he was adding this. You were advised to read it thoroughly. I thought it was boilerplate. Fields gave a small shrug. That's not a legal defense. She pushed the chair back abruptly. He's punishing her for a joke. He's destroying everything we planned, everything she worked for, because of one stupid comment. Fields slowly closed the binder. If it was just one comment, I doubt he would have drafted this clause 2 years ago. I've known Richard for a long time, Elaine. He doesn't react fast. But when he acts, it's final. She stood there, trembling, lips twitching between disbelief and rage. I'll take this to court. This can't stand. You'll lose, he said flatly. The documentation is airtight. There's video evidence, verified by 2 independent digital timestamping services. The clause is legal, binding, and specific. You can't contest a provision you signed into effect. Elaine's eyes flicked down to the paper again. Her own signature stared back at her, smug and curved, like it was in on the joke. She left without saying goodbye. In the parking garage, she sat in the driver's seat of her luxury SUV, both hands trembling as she gripped the wheel. Her phone buzzed, Madison again. She didn't answer. She already knew what the girl was going to say. Fix it. But she couldn't, because she'd already broken it. With ink, and laughter, and silence when she should have spoken. At precisely 7:31 a.m., a soft ping echoed through a server buried in the administrative basement of a nonprofit foundation 3 states away. A line of code executed, triggered by a trust rescission notice filed the day prior. The effect was invisible. No alarms, no alerts. But in its wake, Madison Carter's name vanished from the eligibility list of the Finwood Women in STEM Endowment. 2 hours later, the same happened to her candidacy for the Prestwich Language Immersion Grant, which she had applied for under the pretense of spending a semester in Lyon. That grant, too, had been underwritten in part by T.R. Whitmore, one of several pseudonyms Richard used when he didn't want gratitude, just outcomes. By noon, 3 more dominoes fell. The housing assistant for her summer internship in Washington, D.C. sent an apologetic but firm email. Dear Ms. Carter, due to changes in your financial status, your subsidized housing placement has been withdrawn. We understand this may come as a surprise. Please confirm alternative arrangements within 72 hours. Her international exchange advisor left a voicemail she didn't listen to all the way through. Something about the travel card being inactive, the travel stipend no longer appearing on file, and how they'd need to postpone her application review. Madison didn't scream. Not yet. She still thought this was a mistake. At 3:08 p.m., she called Elaine's father, her reliable backup financier when Richard was being difficult. She'd barely explained half the situation before he cut her off. Richard told me everything, he said. His voice was hard, clipped. About the dinner. About what you said. About how your mother laughed. Grandpa, it was a joke, she protested. No, he snapped. It was a pattern. And you knew exactly what you were doing. You mocked the man who raised you, who paid for everything, who stayed. And you laughed about it. I didn't mean it like that. I don't care what you meant. I care what you did. Then he hung up. Elaine had been standing in the hallway, just close enough to hear the call end. She stepped forward slowly. He's never hung up on you before, she said, softly. Madison turned on her. Why didn't you tell me about the clause? Elaine's mouth opened. Closed. I didn't know, she admitted. You signed it. I didn't read it, Madison. Well, that's just. Madison stopped herself before saying something irreversible. She grabbed her phone, stomped up to her room, slammed the door. Inside, she launched the finance app tied to her trust account. The same one she had used to book flights, reserve hotels, and once casually Venmo herself emergency wine funds during finals week. The screen loaded slowly. The spinning wheel, for the first time, made her nervous. Then it stopped. Account status, revoked. Details, violation of Clause 12, beneficiary misconduct. Disbursements, halted. Retroactive reclamation in process. Contact, see trustee legal counsel. She stared at it. No refresh. No back button could fix it. It was over. And somehow, Richard had done it all without raising his voice. Without showing up. Without even needing to speak to her again. Downstairs, Elaine sat at the kitchen table, flipping through her own emails. Ones from Yale, from financial aid offices, from her own lawyer, who had begun quietly assembling damage control options. But nothing was sticking. Because everything, every dollar, every program, every path, had been tied to the trust. And the trust had been tied to Richard. And Richard was gone. Not dead. Not missing. Just absent. Precisely. Completely. Like someone who finally realized he didn't owe explanations to people who only noticed him when the money moved. Upstairs, Madison scrolled through old texts. Photos of Paris, boarding pass screenshots, screenshots of fund balances she once bragged about to friends. Now it all felt hollow. Like stolen credit. Like she'd been dining on a man's patience and pretending it was her birthright. At 11:09 p.m., after hours of silence, she sent one final text. Can we please talk? I didn't mean any of it. I'm sorry. No reply. She stared at the screen until it dimmed. Until the room felt smaller. Until she finally understood something that no one had said out loud. She hadn't just lost money. She'd lost the one person who ever stayed after everyone else decided she wasn't worth the effort. And she did it with a joke, a toast, and a mother who laughed instead of stopping her. The air in the small community college lobby smelled faintly of floor polish and microwave coffee. Richard stood by the vending machines, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, watching students shuffle between classes with backpacks that looked too heavy for their posture. No Prada bags here. No AirPods dangling like status earrings. Just tired kids carrying books and whatever scraps of hope they could afford between shifts. He recognized her before she saw him. Same stride, same half-tucked shirt, hair pulled back with a cheap plastic clip and not a drop of self-pity in her walk. Grace Hughes, 19. Daughter of Warren Hughes, a janitor Richard had once helped get an emergency hardship grant through a friend at the foundation. Warren was dead now. Pancreatic cancer took him in 10 months. But Richard remembered him as a man who never missed a shift, never raised his voice, and never stopped talking about his daughter's reading habits. Grace spotted him and blinked in confusion. Mr. Carlson? She asked, walking up hesitantly, eyes flicking to the manila folder in his hands. Sorry, I got your message, but I wasn't sure if it was real. It's real, Richard said calmly. Thank you for meeting me. She smiled awkwardly, folding her arms. You said this was about my transfer application? It is. And it isn't. He handed her the folder. She took it, frowning, flipping through the pages. What is this? She asked, reading the cover sheet. This says, Trust Beneficiary Reassignment. Richard nodded. You've been accepted to Columbia. Full ride. Housing included. Graduate school option guaranteed if you keep a 3.6 GPA. Grace looked up, startled. Sir, I didn't even apply to Columbia. I go here because it's what I can afford. What we could manage. You didn't apply, Richard said softly. But someone did on your behalf. Your community college advisor. With my help. Her hands trembled slightly as she paged deeper through the folder. Tuition coverage, program outlines, dorm assignments, meal plans. All of it neatly typed, legally stamped, and very, very real. Why me? She whispered. I'm no one. No, Richard said. You're someone who never asked for anything. Who helped your father mop floors and read scholarship essays by streetlight. Who teaches kids at the shelter how to type without charging them a dime. Who still got straight A's while working 3 jobs. She shook her head, voice cracking. I can't accept this. You're not accepting a gift, Richard said, his voice steady. You're fulfilling a promise. One your father made to me. He asked me, once, to keep an eye on you if anything ever happened. You remember that? Grace swallowed hard and nodded slowly. He said it like a joke. Like, if I kick it, make sure Grace doesn't end up sweeping floors like me. Richard's gaze didn't flinch. I don't do jokes. Not anymore. She closed the folder, pressing it to her chest. What about your family? Won't they be angry you're giving this to me? He allowed himself the faintest smirk. I replaced someone, he said simply. Someone who didn't think I'd notice the difference between obligation and cruelty. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the noise of cheap ambition and paper dreams. By the time they parted, Richard had already made the call. The trust administrator was waiting on confirmation. It took under an hour to redirect the funds. Same bank account. Same trust. New name. He watched as Grace disappeared into the library, still clutching the folder like it might vanish if she blinked. Later that night, Richard logged into the trust dashboard. Where Madison's name once lived in bold black font, now sat a new one, Grace M. Hughes, primary beneficiary. Same balance. Same payout schedule, but with one difference. The clause that had ended Madison's ride. Still there. But this time, Richard knew he wouldn't need it. Because Grace wouldn't toast to the man who paid for her future. She'd earn it, quietly, fiercely, and with more gratitude than anyone in his life had shown him in years. Elaine stormed into the law office like a woman walking into traffic, entitled, distracted, and absolutely certain the world would stop for her. The receptionist barely had time to stand before Elaine barked. I need to speak with Grant. Now. It's urgent. Moments later, she was ushered into the same glass-walled conference room where Richard had quietly rewritten his family's financial DNA 2 years prior. Grant Fields was already inside, a folder open in front of him, glasses perched on his nose like a referee waiting to call foul. Elaine didn't sit. I want to void the clause. Fields looked up slowly. Clause 12. Yes. He closed the folder gently. On what grounds? She blinked. On what grounds? Are you joking? It was a joke, Grant. A dinner toast. My daughter made a sarcastic comment, and he blew up her life over it. Did she make the comment? Elaine's jaw tightened. Yes, but... Did you laugh? Yes, but that's not the point. That's exactly the point, he said. Elaine exhaled sharply, and finally Saturday. Look, it got out of hand. She was showing off. It was thoughtless, but no one meant anything by it. This whole clause is absurd. It's emotional overreaction dressed up in legalese. There must be something you can do. Grant folded his hands. Elaine, you signed a legally binding trust agreement. You initialed the clause. You did so on video. Your daughter's behavior met the conditions for revocation, and Richard followed the outlined protocol. I'll sue, she snapped. I'll file a motion to reverse it. He didn't blink. You'll lose. The clause is ironclad. The language is clean. Intent doesn't override conditions. Elaine leaned forward, her voice colder now. Richard is vindictive. He's using the law to get revenge. No, Grant said, meeting her gaze. He's using the law to protect himself from the people who treated his devotion like a credit card. That clause wasn't written out of spite. It was written out of exhaustion. Elaine sat back. There must be something. Grant opened the folder again. Inside, a DVD. You initialed it here, he said, pointing to a line on a printed page. And here, and signed here, all of it time-stamped. The notary was present. And He tapped the disc. You said on video, quote. Yeah, yeah, whatever, where do I sign? While laughing and flipping through the pages. Elaine's mouth went dry. That was 2 years ago. I didn't know what I was signing. That's not a legal defense, Elaine. You were advised to read it thoroughly. I trusted Richard, she whispered. That trust was a one-way street, Grant replied. When she left the office, the city didn't feel like hers anymore. The building's too tall, the sidewalks too sharp. She drove home in silence, not out of dignity, but because she couldn't summon the words to narrate her downfall. She didn't even make it to the bed. She sat on the floor of the bedroom with her legs folded awkwardly beneath her, surrounded by documents she'd ignored for years. Her laptop sat open, the trust PDF enlarged to 175% zoom, clause 12 highlighted. Her notary signature beside it. Her initials in that lazy, half-hearted swirl she used on everything from dry cleaning receipts to medical waivers. And then the video. She'd forgotten about the law office security cam that recorded all signings. One of those things she used to laugh off as Grant's obsession with paperwork. She watched herself on screen, leaning back in a chair, flipping through the binder like it was a brunch menu. Madison's voice in the background asking about dinner plans. And then her own voice, clear as day. Yeah, whatever, where do I sign? Laughter, scribble, staple. Elaine paused the video. The silence in the room was unbearable. Not because it was quiet, but because it was final. Downstairs, Madison paced the kitchen, reloading her bank app again and again, each time hoping, like a child checking the fridge twice in 5 minutes, that reality might have changed while she wasn't looking. It hadn't. Elaine remained on the floor for hours. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because it hadn't hit her yet. Not fully. That would come later, when the real world, the one where entitlement doesn't cash out, began to close in. In that moment, surrounded by proof of her own apathy, she finally understood the thing she had refused to see for years. Richard had never been trying to buy their love. He was buying peace. A peace they mocked, until he took it with him. And all that was left was silence. The conference room smelled like lemon polish and restraint. Too clean, too orderly, like it had been scrubbed just for this moment. The blinds were half drawn, letting in enough light to feel sterile but not warm. A square table sat in the center, for chairs around it. Only 3 were filled. Richard sat on one side, calm, tailored, unreadable. To his left sat a young woman with quiet posture and calloused hands folded in her lap. Grace wore no makeup, no jewelry. Her blouse was modest, her shoes worn. She didn't look like someone preparing for war. She looked like someone who had already survived one. Across from them, Elaine adjusted her scarf 3 times before sitting. Madison followed, eyes red from crying. Though no actual tears had appeared since she realized her bank account wasn't in error, it was extinct. They didn't speak right away. A court-appointed mediator sat at the head of the table, clipboard in hand, mouth shut. They had no legal grounds to reverse anything. The mediator was just there to facilitate, which in this case meant managing posture and oxygen levels. Richard broke the silence first. You asked for a meeting. So we're here. Elaine leaned forward. We just want to understand what you're doing. What this is. He didn't answer her. He turned slightly toward Madison. This is Grace. Madison blinked. She's your replacement. The words landed like a stone in a dry well, echoing into nothing. She works 3 jobs, Richard continued, and still finds time to help her siblings with homework. She doesn't have a college fund. She doesn't have connections. But she does have integrity and gratitude. 2 things I was foolish to expect from this side of the table. Madison opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Elaine recovered first. You can't just transfer her future to someone else like it's a budget line item. I didn't, Richard said. She transferred it. With that toast. With every comment. Every eye roll. Every silent moment where you, Elaine, could have stepped in, but laughed instead. Madison's voice finally found itself, thin and shaky. You can't just give away my life. He looked at her then, not with cruelty, not even disappointment, just clarity. You gave it away. He reached into a leather briefcase and pulled out a document stamped with an official state seal. This is the final revocation notice. Stamped. Executed. Irreversible. It's over. Elaine stared at the paper like it might leap off the table and slap her. We didn't understand the clause. You didn't care to, Richard replied. You thought I was an ATM with a bedtime. You thought I'd never draw a line because I never had before. The mediator cleared her throat softly, more out of reflex than necessity. Richard stood. Good luck, he said, not sarcastic, not cruel. Just finished. He turned, and Grace stood with him, gathering her modest handbag with both hands. As they walked to the door, Madison stood, desperation leaking into her voice. "Wait, just talk to me. Please. I didn't mean it." He paused at the threshold. "You didn't have to mean it," he said without turning. "You just had to say it." And then he opened the door. Grace stepped through. He followed. The door closed behind them with the softest click Madison had ever heard. But it rang louder in her ears than any slam ever could. The post went live at 2:14 a.m. It was impulsive, emotional, the kind of message typed in a dark bedroom. Phone screen turned down low, heart pounding like maybe this time the internet would listen. Maybe this time the crowd would swarm to her side and lift her out of the mess she'd made. The caption read, "My stepdad cut me off completely because of one joke. No warning, no conversation, just silence. My entire future, gone. He's bitter, controlling, and cruel. I hope no one ever gives a man like that parental rights." Attached was a photo from her freshman year college tour. Richard in the background, holding a map while Madison posed in front of a statue, grinning. She cropped him halfway out, just enough to frame the narrative. Within an hour, the post hit 100 shares. Then 500. Then a Reddit thread picked it up. r/insane parents lit up with sympathy. What kind of man financially abandons a child over a joke? She's clearly the victim of an egotistical stepdad. Girl, you dodged a narcissist. He never loved you. The dopamine flooded in. Likes, hearts, comments from strangers she didn't know, defending her in outrage. For a few moments, Madison felt something like triumph. Then came the first crack. A commenter posted, "Wait, is this the same girl who toasted to the man who's not my dad, but always pays like one at her birthday dinner?" Followed by a second account, anonymous, but with a handle she vaguely recognized, linking a blurry clip. The video. Someone at the table had filmed it. Maybe for their own amusement. Maybe for blackmail. Maybe just because rich kids record everything now. The sound was clear. "To the man who's not my dad, but always pays like one." Madison's voice sneered through the internet. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Elaine's chuckle in the background. "Well, you always were the generous type, Richard." The clip lasted 22 seconds. It took 7 for the internet to turn on her. Comments flipped like a switch. She deserved it. She had it all, and mocked him. "Oh, this one backfired beautifully. He paid for your life, and you treated him like a punchline. Imagine biting the hand that fed your entire future." Then came the final blow. Former classmates chimed in. "Yeah, she used to brag about him like an ATM. She once said she kept him around for the perks. She never even called him dad. Just the old guy with the Amex." Screenshots followed. Group chats. Old messages. Snippets of snide remarks Madison never thought would resurface. All now dragged into the court of public opinion, with no defense team, no PR buffer. Just her and the echo chamber she built with her own sarcasm. The post was taken down by sunrise. Too late. It had been reposted, memed, stitched into TikToks, and bookmarked as a cautionary tale by family therapists and financial advisors alike. By 10:42 a.m., her DMs were flooded with messages that ranged from cruel to scathing to eerily polite. "You didn't just lose money," they seemed to say. "You lost character." She opened her laptop, tried to delete her account. The platform glitched. She tried again. Successful. Gone. But the noise didn't leave with it. The silence that followed was worse. No texts. No calls. No messages. Not even from the friends who had liked the post initially. They had quietly untagged themselves, deleted their retweets, moved on. Elaine came into her room later that day holding a mug of tea, offering comfort far too late. Madison didn't look up. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone face down, laptop closed, the weight of what she'd done finally real and heavy in hers. There was no orientation week, no travel plans, no future calls from donors or deans or high school teachers asking her to come back and speak about perseverance. Just silence. And for the first time in her life, it wasn't peaceful. It was punishment. The kind you can't reverse with an apology or a GoFundMe. The morning sun had just begun to spill through the mist along the hedgerows when the courier arrived. He was young, polite, a little out of breath, clearly unfamiliar with the long, winding drive that led to Richard's gate. He held a modest envelope. No logo, no return address. Just a small, handwritten label. To Mr. Richard Carlson. Richard opened the gate himself, took the envelope without a word, nodded once in thanks, and walked back up to the porch where his coffee waited, still warm. He didn't open it right away. He sat first, exhaled, let the quiet settle in. The house behind him was no longer heavy with other people's noise. Just wood, stone, and stillness. Peace earned. Peace kept. Then, slowly, he peeled back the paper. Inside was a photo. Grace, beaming, stood in front of Columbia's wrought iron gate, her ID badge lanyard around her neck. In the picture, her hair was windblown, her smile too wide, her eyes nearly closed from the force of it. The kind of smile that doesn't happen unless the soul behind it believes it's real. Beneath the photo, a letter, typed on university stationery. Mr. Carlson, we don't often get to witness the quiet revolutions behind scholarship funds. Names on plaques are easy to ignore. But sometimes, rarely, the face behind the funding steps forward, not with applause, but with intention. Your action didn't just fund one student. It funded a message. It redefined what's possible when generosity meets accountability. Grace is already helping 3 incoming students navigate their first week here. She's requested to volunteer at our peer mentoring program. You've given her the chance not just to thrive, but to lift others. From all of us, thank you. The dean had signed it by hand. Richard smiled, just a little. Across town, in the manicured neighborhood he no longer called home, a different mailbox clicked open. Elaine reached in, expecting bills. Instead, she pulled out a single manila envelope. No postage stamp. Delivered by hand. Inside, one page. A photocopy of Clause 12 from the Carlson Carter Educational Trust. The specific paragraph circled in red ink. A clean loop. Neat, deliberate, unmistakable. In the event of documented verbal abuse or defamation by the primary beneficiary, the trust shall be considered null and void, with all current and future entitlements rescinded. Madison sat at the kitchen counter, still wearing pajamas, cradling a mug of untouched tea. Elaine didn't speak at first. She simply held the paper out. Madison took it. Read it once. Then again. Her hands began to tremble. It was real, she whispered. It was in writing? Elaine swallowed hard. My God, she whispered. We did this. Madison looked at her, but Elaine had nothing more to give. No defense. No correction. Just the quiet devastation of being face to face with the cost of her own dismissal. On the street, just outside their cul-de-sac, Richard sat in a rented sedan. Engine off. Windows down. The same coffee from earlier still warm in his hand. He watched them. Watched Madison sink to the chair. Watched Elaine slowly fold the page and press it to her chest like it could take the sting away. He didn't linger. He didn't smile. He just started the engine, put the car in drive, and pulled away. No grand finale. No gloating. Just a quiet exit, like a man leaving a museum he'd already seen too much of. Behind him, the house stayed still. The gate unopened. In front of him, a different road. One he didn't need to justify to anyone. Not anymore.